If you have a scary story that you'd like to hear featured on the channel, then go to mariesfield.com and send it my way. And of course, thank you. So this one may be a little out there, but I feel like there was definitely something supernatural happening to me. Or at least, that's the only explanation I can think of. This started many years ago, so I apologize if I trail off, but I want to make sure I include everything that I can remember. When I was around 11, I was in a horrible accident. I was riding my bike around my neighborhood, literally in that square block like I always had. My mom told me to be home by a certain time for dinner, and I had my watch on to keep track of the time. At one point, as I was rounding the corner, I looked both ways and crossed the street. The intersection I was at was on a hill, so I didn't see the car that came flying over the hill. The last thing I remembered was hearing tires squeal, and I told myself that I was going to die. Then, I woke up in the hospital, hooked to machines, but was quickly calmed down when I saw my mother. She explained to me a bit more as to what happened, and then broke the news to me. The way the car hit me and my bike, it pretty much crushed my left leg, mangling it, so I lost it. I have a prosthetic now, and I get along just fine, so please, don't feel sorry for me. You may not even notice if you were around. Anyways, I found myself to be incredibly lucky, and even thankful to whomever was looking out for me that day. Losing my leg will always be worth it to me, so that I was allowed to keep my life. But from that day on, I started getting these weird feelings or sensations that would make me feel like something was about to happen, and I would avoid it. It may still play out, but it was like I was able to avoid any mishaps involving me. Here's an example. One of the earliest ones I can remember, or at least remember tracking, was after being outside playing. It was hot, and I was thirsty, but I didn't want to go all the way in the house and come back out. Instead, I made my way over to the water hose attached on the side of the house. Right before I bent down to grab it, I got this weird tingly feeling in my left thigh. I remember immediately reaching for my thigh instead, thinking the feeling was weird. I was still a kid and was worried something was wrong with it or my prosthetic, so I instead went inside and told my mother. After looking it over, everything seemed fine, and the feeling was even gone, so we just chalked it up to maybe being a phantom pain, or maybe I was standing funny. I got my water while I was inside, then went back out to play. A little later that evening, my dad went over to grab the hose as he was going to water my mom's garden for her. I was in my bedroom that faced the wall that the hose was on, and next thing I know, I hear my dad shouting expletives. It made me jump, and I ran out to see what had happened, and I saw my dad gripping his hand with the other, turning red in the face. Apparently, there was a scorpion that had made her home in the center of the hose. The crawl space was next to the spigot, and there was some loose dirt around it, so when my dad grabbed the hose, he unsettled the dirt, trying to pull it out, and disrupted her. My mom rushed him to the hospital while a neighbor stayed over to watch me and my younger sibling. I remember talking to my parents about it when they got back because I was going to use the hose too. My dad said he was glad it was him and not me, even though I still felt bad. It was just luck that I decided not to mess with it, I guess. Another time I had been in my room doing whatever when I started feeling a bit hungry, so I went to get a snack. As I made my way to the kitchen, I took my normal path, skipped the last step down, grabbed the door frame, and kind of swung my way into the kitchen. However, I got that weird tingle in my thigh again, causing me to bring my leg further in than I usually do. Once I was in there, my mom came up behind me and shouted to watch my step because she had just broken a glass and went to grab the broom to clean it up. She thought she had picked up all the big pieces, but there was one that happened to land right by the entrance and approximately where I would have stepped with my right foot if I did. I could have easily stepped on it, sliced my foot open or something. Again, we just called it a close call. I continue to have occurrences like this, and for whatever reason, it would all start with that weird pain/feeling in my thigh. And some of the things were minuscule, like the glass. But then there were also bigger, more serious things that occurred. Like when I stayed at my friend's house one night when I was about 14. She had a bunk bed that she shared with her sister, but when she moved into her own room, she just kept it. She slept on the top bunk, and I slept on the bottom. Out of nowhere, I woke up in the middle of the night, fully awake, and I had no idea why. I sat up and started getting the feeling again, so I got off the bed and walked over to the door. By this time, I was starting to get used to that feeling and practically prepared myself for the inevitable. I stood there, wondering if I should wake my friend, when I heard a single pop, and the top of the bunk bed fell, crushing the mattress below. I stood there, fully awake, stunned, while my friend screamed my name, jumping off the bed. I turned on the light, showing her I was all right, but I think it assured her as well as confused her at the same time. Shortly after, her parents came in asking if we were all right and saw the bed. I didn't want to be weird, so I told them I had just gotten up to use the restroom when I heard the sound. They believed me. It's not like it would have been possible for me to bend and crush those metal bars, but it was also very strange that it happened at all. As I got older and became an adult, these things continued to happen, but I actually started telling people about it. My parents and a few of my friends were convinced that I had some kind of supernatural power going on that protected me from danger, but there was still no explanation for it. I had one when I was around 23 that was by far one of the biggest memories that is forever etched in my memory. I like to walk a lot. I guess after losing my leg, it made me appreciate the little things like that. I thought I would take a walk to a local cafe, hang out and enjoy my coffee, then head back home to start my day. On my way home, I pressed the button to cross the street and waited. When the signal changed to walk, I started getting that feeling again, causing me to grab my thigh and hold off on walking. As you might have guessed it, a car came barreling through that intersection, honking their horn as they approached. Now, granted, I could hear a horn in the distance, but if you asked me if the car with the horn would be going through that very intersection I was at, not stopping, I would tell you no. I figured they were just honking at another car or something in the road. Needless to say, that one left me a bit shaken. Unlike my bike accident, I would not have survived that if I was hit. I went home and took some time to calm down after that one. These incidents continued to unfold, and I was always left without words. And everyone around me joked about me being able to see the future. Whether big or small, I found myself one step ahead of calamity, like the universe itself bestowed this power to me as repayment for taking my leg. However, as mysterious and welcoming this ability was, it also did come to an end. After the birth of my child, the glimpses of the future gradually faded. But that didn't mean it was entirely gone. As she got older, I noticed she would do things without any real reason. Like she would stray from her normal ritual, only for something to have happened that would have harmed her otherwise. She's 13 now, and she still seems to do it. And one thing about her, she was born with a hearing disorder and uses hearing aids. She's brought it up to me that she would get these weird pains in her ear, and I assumed it was her hearing aids. But she says it happens when she doesn't have them on. She also explained how it happens before these events, causing her to divert from her normal path. We've talked about this before, as in my daughter and I tell her that she's special. My husband is even aware of all of this, and thankfully, he's open-minded, but I don't think he quite understands the connection the two of us have. To this day, I still have no explanation as to why I was given this ability. And I want to believe it was just good luck or something, but I feel like it has to be more than that, especially since it now affects my daughter. I may never find the answers, but one thing is certain. I was touched by something extraordinary, something that defied the boundaries of comprehension. This happened when I, male, was a kid back around 2004. My friends and I loved to be outside and explore places we've never been. We played in the trees behind my friend's house, climbing them and making a makeshift hammock in them. We loved to find new places to explore and had been itching to go through this old house that had been abandoned and empty for as long as I could remember. I never saw anyone on the property or anything about it change other than the grass and weeds grow taller and taller. Then my sweet parents, unbeknownst to them, got me a birthday gift that would push us to explore that house. I had been wanting walkie-talkies for quite some time. I loved the idea of being able to go anywhere in the park, the woods, and even between rooms and talk to my friends. I had some cheap ones that didn't work very long or from very far apart, so I wanted to get a better pair, and my parents followed through. I told my friend Troy, and he came over one day so we could try out our new walkies. We were walking all over my yard and home, trying to see how far they would reach, and to our surprise, they still came out clear and crisp, with him standing at the tip of the front yard and me standing at the edge of the backyard. This seemed like quite the distance for us, enough for us to do a lot of things. So he instantly brought up the idea of exploring that house. The house was a lot closer to Troy's place, so we planned it out, and I was given permission to stay at Troy's for the weekend. After I was dropped off, we went up to his room to gather a small backpack of stuff we might need. It wasn't much, and probably wasn't even anything that you would actually take while exploring, but we were still kids. We hopped on our bikes, I was allowed to ride his older brothers, and we made our way to the house, telling his mom we were going to the nearby park. Once we arrived, we ditched our bikes in the tall grass, hoping they were hidden enough so that no one would see us. We walked up to the house, both of us nervous, and tried at the door. I don't know why we were surprised when it was locked. After trying a few times, we decided to try and look for any windows that we could access and maybe climb through instead. There were a few of them that we could reach, but they also seemed to be locked or seized, again, leaving us at a dead end. Now, even though we were kids and we were willing to trespass, I suppose, In order to explore this place, the thought of breaking in didn't even cross our mind. We were pretty disappointed, and since our curiosity and exploration wasn't fulfilled, we thought we would at least try the backyard and see what we could find. The backyard was actually pretty well hidden by the dilapidated privacy fence, so we were surprised by what we saw. We broke off a plank that was already rotting and falling apart and crawled through. The yard was filled with different decorations like gnomes and lights. There was a garden lined by red bricks and small fencing with those tomato stands in them. There was a small table with a dried up and cracked coffee mug resting on it, and 2 chairs tucked under the table. Then, the part that got our attention the most was a small cracked stone path that led straight back through the yard to another gate. When we opened the gate, it appeared to just lead to trees. It was so dense we couldn't really see through them. This immediately set our eyes aglow, ready to explore. We could see the trees from the front, but it didn't seem like anything we would have expected. We immediately pulled out the walkies, tested them, and agreed to head in opposite directions to explore. We probably walked 20 to 25 feet apart as we talked to each other through the walkies. We weren't really seeing anything of interest other than some cool-looking trees, so we were just talking to each other, cracking jokes and saying curse words, because we thought we were cool. But then, we started getting some interference on the walkies. At first, it just sounded like singing, so I assumed we were picking up a radio station or something. After confirming with Troy that he could hear it too, I told him we should go back to the gate. Once back, we could tweak with them some and see if we could clear it up and listen in better. We were still just expecting it to be a radio station, but we were hopeful it may have been something more entertaining. As I was walking back, I was already eager to listen, so I started flipping through the channels and listening. And sure enough, I found one that was clearer, but still had a bit of static. However, it was not a radio station, and it certainly didn't sound like a phone call either. What we did hear made our blood run cold. It sounded like a woman, or maybe a young girl, crying. Crying may be an understatement, though. She was sobbing. You could hear the hiccups and gasps of air between each cry. We both looked at each other, probably trying to read the other's expression, and carried on listening like surely this was a prank. Maybe someone saw us or was playing with another radio or walkie and just wanted to scare us. But we couldn't stop listening. I wish we wouldn't have. The woman sobbing would then break in between and start talking. Again, the static was there, so it was hard to make out everything, but we both agreed on what we heard. I'm gonna die, I don't want to die, please God help me. Those words pierced through the airwaves, accompanied by heart-wrenching sobs. It was as if someone's very soul was crying out to us for help, drowning in anguish and fear. Troy and I exchanged terrified looks, and we knew we needed to tell someone. We ran back through the yard to the front and jumped on our bike, trying to head back as fast as we could go. We kept the walkies on, hoping to still hear the woman, but it sadly faded away completely when we returned back to his house. The thought of us being in trouble because we lied didn't even cross our mind. The cries and pleas from the woman were far more important to us. We ran inside and I let Troy do the talking. His mom looked confused at first, so we had to slow down and explain it all to her again. She seemed pretty disappointed in us for lying and got pretty stuck on that. She told us we needed to stay home and not leave the yard. We then tried begging her to go with us and explain what we heard again, but she didn't seem to believe us. She said something similar to what we originally assumed, that someone was probably messing with us and possibly were inside that old creepy house. Bottom line, she refused to consider the idea that it was real and dismissed us. We went to his room and tried everything we could to get the signal back, but it was long gone. We tried playing games, watching TV, but the mood had been pretty spoiled by our earlier experience. I couldn't help but feel this sense of guilt, knowing that we were helpless and there was nothing we could do about it. Even when I went home, I told my parents about it, and they didn't seem convinced either. They too were disappointed that we went to the house, but while my mom did look a little curious and maybe even concerned, my dad said that what we heard wouldn't have been possible and explained how we chose to hear things within the static. I felt frustrated and helpless. Over time, I would slowly make peace with this incident, but it was never fully gone from my memory. Some things would happen that would bring it back to the foreground. When I heard about a missing person, I thought about her. The older I got, the more I wanted answers, and I began scouring the internet and news for any information that could explain the eerie incident. I tried looking into radio interference and how it worked, and I even looked for anything about people that may have gone missing in my area around that time, or even people found, but nothing matched up. I found nothing conclusive and no trace of an explanation. It was as if this incident had vanished into thin air, leaving me with nothing but lingering questions and a deep sense of unease. To this day, the memory of that spine-chilling encounter remains etched in my mind. The sobbing on the airwaves, the helplessness in those words, I can still hear them echoing in the depths of my consciousness, and all I can do is hope and pray that my parents were right. I have a strange story that occurred back when I was in middle school that I genuinely cannot explain. Back then, I didn't have many friends, but the friends that I did have were pretty close. We were a bit of a clique, but when you don't have many people to talk to or do things with, that sort of thing just happens. My group of friends included 3 other guys. We'll just call them J, T, and P. The 4 of us were super close all throughout elementary school, and we were more like a small band of brothers than just casual friends. This continued up to middle school as well. We had several classes together, so it worked out pretty well. The second quarter of the second year of middle school, which would have made it 8th grade, I think, we ended up adding a 5th person to our little group of friends, a boy named Mark. I'm using Mark's name because he's probably the most important person in this story, as the event is about him specifically, and for other reasons that may make sense later. Mark had apparently gone to the same elementary school as us, though he wasn't in the same class as the 4 of us, and we'd never met him. I remember when I asked him about it, he had mentioned that he was in my class in 4th and 6th grade, but I couldn't remember him being in the classroom. He knew the teachers' names, and he knew other kids in the rooms, which told me that he wasn't lying. I felt bad, but I just couldn't recall him being there. Now, the reason that we had added Mark to our friends group is kind of strange. He just kind of showed up one day during the morning and at lunch like he'd always been there. He acted like he had always been part of our group. He was talking to us, laughing about things that only we would have found funny. It was seriously as if he was one of us from day one. But he just kind of showed up and sat with us one day. I know that may not sound too weird to some people. Maybe he was just really charismatic. But it was weird, and it got weirder. Not because he was there, but because of what happened after that second quarter. In between second and third quarter is winter break, which is basically that week and a half or so where we didn't have class. During this time, I had to spend the entire week at my grandparents' house, at my parents' request, so I didn't get to spend any time with my group of friends. I was bummed out about it, and J, T, and P promised me that they wouldn't do anything too stupid without me, as I was always the one getting in trouble. I spent my time there, and then when it came time to go back to school, I noticed that Mark wasn't there on the first day back. I didn't think much of it. People get sick when they have all their holiday get-togethers. Maybe he was just sick and going to be back the next day. Now, mind you, at this point, I didn't mind Mark, but I didn't really feel like he was one of the boys, if that makes sense. I had an issue with him just kind of showing up and thinking that we had to accept him as one of us, but I didn't dislike him. He was an okay kid, and he was a pretty funny guy as well. Then, the next day, I noticed that there was still no Mark. I ended up asking Jay if he had heard from him, and he asked me who I was talking about. T and P both said the same thing. They didn't know anyone named Mark. I thought they were messing with me at first, just trying to pull one over on me, and then when Mark came back, they would pretend like I was crazy, and they never said anything about not knowing him. That was until I asked our math teacher, the only class I had with Mark, if Mark was just out sick or if he was okay. She had no idea who I was talking about. I described Mark, said his last name to her, told her he was the funny kid with the short dark hair and glasses that usually sat next to me. And she seriously looked at me like I was insane. She said that the person that sat next to me was a girl in class named Deborah, and that she would be back in class the next day. But there was never anyone named Mark that sat next to me, and no one by that name in the class at all. This set me on a really weird and confused path. I actually went back to try and find Mark in any of my elementary school yearbooks, checked the 7th grade yearbook as well, and I couldn't find him at all. I checked my 4th and 6th grade books, and there was never anyone named Mark, last name starting with a G, in either of those classes, or the other classes for those years. In fact, there were no Marks nor any students with the last names starting with G's in either year. It was like he was just wiped from the face of the earth entirely, and I was the only one to remember him. It was really strange that this kid that showed up one day, like he knew who we all were and had always been our friend, disappeared as quickly as he integrated into our group. I really didn't know what to make of this, and I still don't. Like I said, I didn't mind the guy. He wasn't my best friend or anything, but to get to know someone over a couple of months, spend mornings and lunch with him, and have math class with him, only to have him simply disappear without a trace, it made me feel like I was crazy. I know this wasn't a hallucination, as my other friends interacted with him, and it was seriously a couple of months. There's no way I hallucinated a friend for that long. In the end, I just had to accept that this person didn't exist and move on. Something I hated doing, but it didn't matter how much I talked about him, because no one else knew who he was. I hope that nothing bad happened to him, And I hope that if he was from another timeline or something, that he and I stayed friends. Unfortunately, in this reality, he just simply never existed. I love riding my bike at night. Being able to go out with no music and just listen to the night sounds was always so therapeutic for me. I didn't need any music to drown out other people or cars passing. I could listen to the wind as it weaved through the trees or ran through my hair. I could listen to the crickets chirp or the frogs croak in the creek running along the side of the road, or even just the sound of my tire spinning as I glided along the road. I worked a later shift, so I was usually home around 9 or 10 p.m. I'd go change, then head out for an hour or so before I went back home to shower and go to bed. On this night, I didn't have to work the next day, and I was really itching for something new, so I decided to ride a little further and off the path that I normally took. I went around the block as I normally do, cut across the street and past the gas station. I was now further than I had ever really gone. I didn't feel uneasy or nervous though. I actually almost had a second wind in me exploring a new area. There was an underdeveloped area nearby as new homes were being built, so I told myself I would ride around in there and start heading back. That way I didn't wear myself out, making the ride back exhausting. I was going over all these newly paved roads, making it one of the smoothest rides I had ever been on. It also made it extremely quiet, to where it was just my tires and the crickets in the distance. Until I started hearing singing, or humming rather. At first, I just thought it was another person enjoying the night, until it finally registered where I was. There were no houses here yet. It was just the roads along the outside of the soon-to-be homes. There were a few foundations laid out and frames set up, but no actual houses. Why would there be people around? I slowed down a bit so I could hear the singing better. The song sounded familiar, but I couldn't place it. It was just the music though, as I mentioned, no lyrics. As I went around the bend, the humming got louder and I could finally make out the song. It was Stand By Me. I could almost sing along with it, with how well the humming was. I stopped my bike and began to look around between the few construction machines and frames with the flashlight on my phone. As I walked past one of the plots and around a pile of dirt and rocks, I could see a woman sitting in the dirt, swaying side to side. I just stood there for a few seconds, watching and listening to her. The song came to an end, and after a few seconds, she just started singing again. My clumsy ass, however, missed the dip in the ground in front of me, causing me to stumble a bit. When I did this, I of course made a gasp, and there was probably a sound as my feet shuffled, trying to regain my balance. All of this was enough to cause her to stop singing and swaying. She slowly stood up, but never turned around to face me. The whole situation was pretty eerie, but I didn't really feel scared until she stood up. My fight or flight instinct kicked in, and I immediately apologized and turned around to go back to my bike. As I kicked the stand and got back on, she began screaming. It made me jump, and I took off as fast as I could on my bike. The whole time, she continued screaming as I rode away. Even after I was out of that new neighborhood, I could still hear her in the distance. I crossed the street, so I was on the same side of the lights the whole way home. When I got there, I quickly put my bike on my patio instead of my garage like I usually did, ran inside, and locked the door. I told a few friends about this and we all laugh about it now, but holy hell, that was one of the creepiest things I had ever experienced. And no, I haven't gone back, but there are a few houses there now. Good luck to them. So that, my friends, was another collection of unexplained stories. Personally, one of my favorites, because I love when there's not a direct answer as to how it happened or what's going on between people and disembodied voices and being able to see the future through leg pains. That's crazy, but I like it. These are good. I just remember with the walkies thing, because back whenever landlines were more popular, when my parents had one, I remember sometimes in certain rooms, like spots in rooms, we could pick up the interference of like somebody else's phone, I think it was. So when that would happen, I would always try to like get a better signal and try to listen into other people's conversations. I remember just being like completely silent, my sister and I listening, thinking, what if they could hear me? Because I didn't know how any of that worked. So it's funny how that's not something that you hear about too often anymore. So that's funny. Anyways, if you did enjoy this video, please do give it a like below. And if you'd like to hear more content like this, consider subscribing, turn on notifications. That'll help you get notified whenever I do these videos, because I need to get better about that. And you can also leave a comment below letting me know your thoughts on the video. Do you like these stories? Do you not like these stories? Or if you could be on any game show, what would be the one that you'd win the $1 million on? And with that being said, friends, I hope you had a fantastic day and a great rest of your week. And until next time, take care.